Welcome, it's Jeremy Allen Gould. I'm coming to you today to confirm between God and of man that in fact the rumors that you have all heard are true. I started this podcast because I freaking love music. I was privileged enough to book amazing artists and bands in the past, and I was lucky enough to stay in touch with many of them to this day. This is a place to hear their stories. Thank you so much for riding along on this journey, and I hope you enjoy what you hear. With that said, the rumors are definitely true.
Everybody's sick in the head, nothing new here. Apologies are not necessities, they always fall on deaf ears. And when I tried to help you, you didn't listen to me. Consider this your final warning. I don't need nobody, I got everything I need on my own. Now I don't need your honey, I got everything I need on my own. Oh, you on your high horse, casting your stone. But I don't need nobody, I got everything I need on my own. Everybody owes you something, so you tell me. You're offering a carrot dangling, but it ain't helping.
Thank you for tuning in to this latest episode of the Rumors Are True podcast. My name is Jeremy, and today I welcome Shane Tutmarc. You know Shane from the band Dolour, Shane Tutmarc and the Traveling Mercies, and Solar Twin, as well as many other records over the years that he's played on, been a part of. Really awesome conversation with this extremely talented and gifted artist. So cool of him to come on this podcast. Hope you enjoy this latest episode with Shane Tutmarc. Shane, what is up, my friend? Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it, dude.
Jeremy, thanks for having me. Good to finally chat with you.
Yes, man. I've been looking forward to it. I'm really stoked, not only to have you on, but just for the new record coming out, man. What's
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you thought you cut out. I apologize. What do you got going on currently? What's going on in your world currently?
I mean, pretty much daylight upon magic is sort of consuming me right now. My wife and I we're actually down in your neck of the woods for a week.
Yes.
Trying to vacation, but I was able to kind of like unplug for a couple hours a day, which was really nice. But I'm sort of in that crunch mode right now, being that I'm doing 1,000% of all the promotion for this record and trying to get everything together. It was a little hard to unplug, but
yeah. How did the weather wind up being down there?
It was good. Like the day we got in, it was beautiful. The next day rained, but then it was great because the weather app kept being wrong. Like it was supposed to kind of rain the whole time we were there.
Florida. That is Florida. That's funny.
That's kind of Nashville too, so we're sort of used to it. But no, it ended up being beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Where at in Nashville do you live? What area?
I'm actually in Madison, which is just up the street from East Nashville kind of neighborhood. So like about East Nashville is where I moved to from Seattle and lived there for about 7 years. But now I've kind of bounced around between Hendersonville, Madison, and
You like Nashville?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think, so many of the things about Nashville that kind of caused me to move here have changed. So it's been an evolution for sure. A lot of deja vu of like Seattle Boom City stuff, just the whole, Nashville skyline has changed so much. But
sure.
But it's been a town where I've been able to wear a lot of hats, musically, creatively, that I probably wouldn't have been able to wear had I just stayed in Seattle. So
yeah.
And I found my wife here, so
that's cool.
Yeah,
that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. That's awesome. I love Nashville. I
haven't been there I've been there a handful of times. I was trying to say I haven't been there a ton, but the time I've been there, I really enjoyed it, and got a lot of friends up there, and weather's pretty cool, that type of thing. So
yeah, absolutely.
Sweet, man. Well, let's talk about growing up for you. Influences, bands, records, shows, maybe things that just kind of influenced who you are and kind of maybe got you on the trek that you've been on.
Yeah, so I grew up in Seattle, Washington, into a very musical family. So, every family get together was a jam session, and, from like the earliest age, just like trying to get in on the jam sessions, and connected with music super early on. Like probably the earliest thing I can really think of is the movie Amadeus.
Love that movie.
Freaked out on that as a little kid. And I think because he was a child prodigy, I was like, I was like 6 or 7 seeing that and just going like, I want to be like that, and started making up little songs, like around that age. And, that just kind of like turned into, discovering rock and roll and Elvis and the Beatles. And then, being in Seattle, kind of like getting, the ripple effect of Nirvana and everything happening there. And, it kind of felt like we were living in the center of the universe, growing up there, Ken Griffey Jr. and Microsoft and Starbucks and, everything just kind of felt like it was very Seattle centric at that period of time. And so it was, it was a really cool community to come up in for sure. But
what, so tell me, growing up, where were you, what part of Seattle were you in? And let's talk about the music kind of that, obviously the Seattle sound was massive then. Was that a huge influence on you?
I was young enough where I was 12 years old when Kurt died. So, I feel like I probably got like the last wave of it, like becoming aware of it kind of right towards the end of that. But it did have a huge effect on me. And I think it was like in a weird way, like Kurt's death was sort of this thing of like, okay, it's my turn now. Like I somehow like I took it as like this sort of like, not inspired by his death by any means, but just sort of like encouraged by sort of having like that voice of a generation moment happen, like right in front of your eyes. And I was already so kind of steeped. I'd gotten into Elvis really young and then the Beatles. And so I already kind of had like such a sense of music history that sort of seeing that in my own lifetime, I sort of felt like I had a context for it that a lot of people my age didn't have, even today, if I'm, playing with other musicians, most of them don't have much context before the 90s, or something like that. But I feel like I already had kind of gotten into country and blues and rock and roll and the Beatles whole thing and Tin Pan Alley and sort of had an understanding of how everything fit together culture wise or whatever, from a pretty young age. So yeah, that definitely was inspiring. And Nirvana songs were so easy to learn, that it became.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. So, was there any particular bands that kind of just smacked you in the face? I guess when you got to that certain age where it just clicked.
So many, but Nirvana would have been huge for me as far as like bands of my generation, and Oasis.
Oh, I love Oasis.
Weezer. And then, I started getting more into indie stuff and discovered Sunny Day Real Estate.
Okay, yeah. I just saw them like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And again, Seattle music, and then, started playing shows myself and getting to know more of the local kind of underground stuff and kind of stopped really listening to like radio rock or whatever, by like high school. But
I get it. Is that kind of when you met Aaron Sprinkle in that kind of time frame?
Yeah, so like that story, it's kind of like a weird. So I basically I was super into the Beatles and already starting to write songs, and so therefore I was like, and I was obsessed with like the sort of psychedelic period of the Beatles, and so I was like, I need to do LSD to be able to write songs like I Am the Walrus and Strawberry Fields Forever. So I started doing, trying to find drugs very young, and it kind of like climaxed with like getting totally in trouble with my parents. My parents sort of had me live with like my aunt and uncle for a while they were figuring out what to do with me. And they went to this church called Calvary Fellowship in Seattle. And Dave Sprinkle was the youth group leader.
Oh, nice.
And he's playing Beatles songs in the youth group.
That's awesome.
And so I was like, okay, cool. This is rad. And I think my aunt and uncle might have said like, hey, this is our nephew. He's like super into music, but he's like kind of struggling or whatever. And so he brought me to a Poral Lou recording session.
Oh, that's so cool.
Which was like so cool. And it was like, the first time I'd been in a recording studio. And, I'm sure it was like his idea of like, missionary work or something. I don't know. But so, met Aaron Sprinkle and Jesse and the whole band. And they were working on a picture of the Eighth Wonder.
I love that record.
Yeah. So, it was really cool just like kind of seeing that they were working. I remember they were working on like the backwards piano at the intro of the first song on the album. And
oh, yeah, real.
So it's just kind of like those like sort of experiments. And, I really connected with it. And then even when I, came back to my parents' house and stuff, I would still go to that youth group with my cousin occasionally. And they had a really active, they put on shows there too at this, they called it Rock House. And so some of my earliest shows were like playing there. And come to find out, it was like the church that like Jeremy Enoch went to and Dave Bazan and Damian Gerardo and, 90 Pound Wuss guys and, Roadside Monument. I mean, all those kind of like that era, of Seattle kind of just all went to that church or were involved with that, church in some way. And I got to know Casey Westcott, who is now in Fleet Foxes, from that church too. And so it was just a really small community that like I kind of accidentally stumbled into. And so when I was making like my first, I'm sure I probably way overshot what the question was, but
no, you're good. You're good.
But when I was making my first demo, like little EP, when I was like 15, Aaron Sprinkle was like the only person I knew that like recorded and stuff. And so I got him to mix it. I think I paid him like $300 or something like that, and he even played a guitar solo on it on one of the songs. But so that kind of started our connection, which just because I was so young and didn't know anybody and happened to get to know him, I ended up kind of whenever I had something going on, I'd either ask him to do it or he would suggest somebody else. And so
that's awesome.
We kind of did a handful of things leading up to Dolour's second album, Suburbiac, which we did fully together. But
yeah, well, let's talk about the beginning of Dolour. Maybe kind of bring me through how that kind of came together, and then we'll start to obviously kind of touch on some of the records.
Yeah, I mean, what Dolour became really was a solo project. After I finished the first album, any original members that I had started with in high school were all gone, So it was sort of the record I did with Sprinkle, where it was like, okay, this is a one-man band. I know I can do whatever whatever needs to be done, and anything I can't do, Aaron can do, and we can just kind of like make this record together. And I don't even know how much it was thought to be an album. It was just sort of like I knew him and he had just started working at what became the Compound Studio. Yeah. But it was like the first location of it, which was just in the basement of Tooth and Nail headquarters. And so we were just doing some demos, and Brandon Ebel from Tooth and Nail would come down and he was just real jokey and kind of funny and seemed to like what I was doing. But the songs were clearly like, I mean, we were working on a song called Menage a Trois, songs had
not a Christian band.
No, I mean, there was, references to sex, drugs, and whatever. But so he was like, I've always had this idea of, I think originally he wanted to call it Evil Twin Records.
Man, that's such a great name.
Yeah. And so it really was working on that record with Sprinkle in the basement there that like Brandon Ebel was like, okay, like this like dream of doing this sort of secret secular label kind of like came to fruition, and it eventually became Fugitive Recordings, which didn't last very long at all. But like basically, I mean, I don't know how into the weeds we want to get with that, but like they were kind of trying to shop my record the whole time I was working on it. So I don't even know if ultimately they wanted to put it out, but it was sort of like they thought that maybe they could make some money off of it or whatever, And so I think almost by the time it came out, they were sort of like, okay, I guess we have to do this now,
Yeah.
And so very quickly, I could see that whatever the promises were to me at the time that I signed were not going to happen.
Wow.
And so I asked to leave like 4 months after the record came out or something like that, and they let me. And then the label maybe only really lasted
probably like 5 or 6 records if I think like that.
Yeah, I think they like kind of kept the name around for like reissue stuff, but as far as like an active label, like I think it was like maybe like 4 or 5 records total. But
just out of curiosity, I when you just mentioned, and I'm not trying to stir stuff up, but you just mentioned
stir it up.
things that you didn't, that they promised that didn't, like
the biggest one for me was like I wanted to have unlimited access to the studio, and they said I'd be able to go in there whenever I wanted, whenever I had an idea, and like because when I was working on Suburbiac, like I had to wait for Cutlass to make a record, and then I had to wait for some other band.
Oh, I gotcha.
Because I was one of the first artists to work in that studio with Sprinkle. He had like a wide open calendar when we started.
And then it got booked up.
And then it was like I was last on the totem pole for like whenever there was a free day, and I'd have like an exhausted Aaron, and so one of the things was like I want to be able to just go in there whenever
I got you.
And that very quickly didn't happen, and so that was the biggest one for me. And it just didn't seem like they really, other than just putting the record out physically, it didn't seem like they really were doing much to be actively like a label or a support.
I was gonna say, what do you think? As being a former artist on that, what do you think? Where do you think they failed? And this isn't a slight to Brandon or anyone. I curious.
I think they failed because they didn't really want to do the work of like starting from scratch. I think it was like kind of
they wanted to tail off a tooth and nail.
I think it was just too easy for them at that point because they had all their like distro and all their stuff figured out in the Christian world. But I think to do a secular thing, I don't think they really anticipated it being like a whole new thing for them to have to figure out, No,
I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I didn't mean that wrong. I loved the idea of it. I was actually shocked that it wasn't successful, looking back on it. But I mean, makes sense, it's kind of, he's got his bread and butter and it's nice to dip your toe in the other pool, but sometimes, it's not the best move.
It left me in a weird place. I mean, thankfully, for better or worse, nobody really knew that stuff at the time. Like it wasn't promoted as connected to Tooth and Nail at all. I think only people very in the know like knew what that was, but because it had separate distribution and all that stuff. But one of the unfortunate things was like when the Tooth and Nail catalog got sold or partially sold or whatever happened to, they got sold to like Capital EMI or whatever. The Dolour album went with it. And
really?
So I've been trying to get that record back for like 20 years now, and still can't really get a hold of anyone to make anything happen.
Unbelievable.
So entertainment lawyers, holler at me if you want some
holler at your boy.
Pro bono work.
Well, let's talk about Suburbiac, the record that you just mentioned. You working with Sprinkle and on Fugitive Recordings. Maybe walk me through that record and kind of your thoughts on it, looking back on it. Obviously.
In a lot of ways, I think of it as kind of more of my first album because Dolour's actual first album was sort of the end of Dolour as a band era. So it's like kind of like, oddly enough, like our first album was sort of a transition album into becoming what Dolour really was. And so to me, like Suburbiac really was the first time I was like fully kind of just going for it, like pop smorgasbord. Just everything in the kitchen, the sink, into every song, and Aaron was, just a great foil in that process because any crazy idea I had, he could make it happen.
That's so cool.
Or he'd throw something crazy back, and he really like pushed me to do as much as I did on that record. Like I played drums on a few tracks and played, I think, all the bass other than some upright bass we had. And then a mutual friend of ours, Phil Peterson, did strings and some horn stuff on there. And he's gone on to work with Taylor Swift and Lana Del Rey.
Wow.
St. Vincent and
Crazy.
And yeah, so we just, we'd call in various friends to do little things here and there, but it was mostly just me and Aaron just like goofing off in the studio, having fun and just making, just over the top pop music,
When you heard it, when it was done, what'd you think of it? I mean, Aaron obviously has got a knack for making things sound incredible. I mean, they had to feel pretty good, huh?
It's tough because I think if I didn't know the process was kind of tough because like I was saying earlier, it's like there would be, a couple days of like white hot creativity working in the studio, and just like months of like me waiting for some like carbon copy Christian ripoff band to like finish their album that Aaron's like rewriting all their songs for them and playing all their instruments. And I'd be going like, I have a record that I wrote myself that I'm playing everything on that I'm trying to work on. So I felt very frustrated as an artist through that process. And so even by the end, it's like, I just didn't feel like we had as much time as we could have had. Like I'm proud of the record and in a lot of, early Dolour fans, like that's kind of their record. But, I wasn't that impressed.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, I get that. I mean, and that's got to be tough too. When you obviously sign with the label, it's like you think, oh, this is gonna be cool, it's gonna be awesome, and then it winds up being the direct opposite. And
I felt like I was still like being the one that was working the hardest and pushing the hardest to like make it was, and that was just frustrating to have all these different people involved, but yet like you're still having to carry the majority of the weight.
No, I get that. Well, looking back on it, I mean, obviously you said you still haven't been able to get a hold of it. Is that something obviously you're going to keep trying to do, and maybe at some point maybe a vinyl release or something of that nature?
I'd love to do that. And I feel like every couple years I'll kind of make the rounds again of trying to get a hold of someone at either label. And I did have some old friends there for a while that would like send me a message, but just with the way the industry is, it's like they'd give me an email for someone who had just gotten fired or like this or that. And so it's just kind of been a wild goose chase. And I've even tried, a lot of back end ways of sort of like flagging the album on streamers to sort of see if I could get somebody's attention. And they just really, it's, again, it probably means so little to them, is financially or whatever that like, I don't, I wish they would just kind of be like, hey dude, whatever, like
here have it. Yeah.
So I don't know what it's going to take, but I mean, just as recently as like 2 months ago, I was like contacting people.
Sure.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay, cool. So did you do touring after that record at all, or was it just kind of shows in the Seattle area or Nashville?
No, I mean, that probably like our most touring was, the early 2000s. I had a management team that I guess I got together with shortly after Suburbia came out, and they were based out of New York at that time. And so I put together a band in New York so I could fly out there and do East Coast shows. And then at some point I put together a band in LA as well. Wow. So I could go down the coast and just fly out by myself and rehearse with the band and then play some shows around California and stuff. So, I mean, I did a lot of East Coast, West Coast, and then we did like, South by Southwest and eventually CMJ and this festival in Seattle called Bumper Shoot. We played.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
After Suburbia. Yeah. So, I mean, we did lots of playing, but I mean, we didn't really do a full U.S. tour until after the next album. But
okay, I got you. Speaking of, obviously Fugitive lets you out, which is kind of a cool deal in and of itself.
Yeah, I thought it was like, I come to find out they still, owned everything, and but I was able to walk because it was like a 3-record deal or something like that. So
yeah, I got you.
It was nice. Yeah.
So you wind up signing with Made in Mexico, which has a link to Tooth and Nail as well, in a sense. And of course, Damien Jurado at the time was running the label, which, to be honest with you, I didn't even know that. I was clueless on that. I mean, I know James Morellis had started it, and I, it had put some fantastic records out. Maybe talk about signing with Made in Mexico and Damian Jurado and kind of I'm a massive fan of him.
Yeah, I don't know if you would even know this, but like I went to high school with the guys in this band called the Blood Brothers.
Oh yeah, I know them.
And they actually, I and them started this side project that became the Vogue, which had a 7-inch out on James Moreles's early Made in Mexico.
Wow, that's so cool.
I wasn't in the band by the time that happened, but it was like one of those things where like we all kind of started together and then it sort of became something else. And I was just getting Dolour off the ground at the time. But I introduced those guys to Casey Westcott, who was in the Vogue.
Wow.
And then that led to Crystal Skulls and then Fleet Foxes for Casey. And so it's just kind of interesting that like Calvary Fellowship connection with all that stuff. But it's like, had I not like gone to that church and met him and then went to high school with the Blood Brothers dudes, you know, like that thing kind of made
so cool.
happen. But so I had met James a handful of times. I was, you know, still in high school, super young, but like I remember at some barbecues or something like that, running into him. And I think he was like working in the mailroom at Tooth and Nail at the time. So it was all like, you know, sort of 8 degrees or 2 degrees of separation. But I'd also, you know, met Damian Jurado very early on. I think I saw him open for Jeremy Enoch.
Oh wow!
On the Return of the Frog Queen tour, and met him after the show, and I remember him having a conversation about he had this little label called Casa Records at the time.
The tape rec.
Yeah, tapes, exactly. And so I remember handing him one of my tapes, and he even like sent me an email of like a review of it. You know, I was like 16 or something like that. And then I ended up working at this Jewish community center randomly that he worked at too, because my girlfriend at the time worked there. So we were both like, you know, working with 2- and 3-year-old Jewish children together.
Wow.
And, you know, just became buds. Like he would give me, I didn't have a car at the time, so he'd give me a ride home, you know, half the time or whatever. And, his move was just turn on your blinkers and drive on the side of the highway, and it goes a little faster. But so yeah, so what happened after Suburbiac was I basically just got a laptop and Pro Tools and just made a record myself, put it out myself, and then Damian and Made in Mexico, there was a couple other people involved, were like, hey, we'd love to like give this a real release, you know.
Wow.
So I'd already put the record out, but I was like, okay, cool. And like, I was already in the beginning stages of working on another record at the time. So I was like, again, I was a little like too ahead of myself, but I was like, cool. Yeah. Like put out New Old Friends, but I have this other one that would be great to put out right after it. And they were like, awesome. Totally. And so they got that record out in late 2004. And, you know, it was cool. Like they'd like come to every show, and it was a real like kind of family,
that's awesome.
kind of thing. Yeah. But then that other record I had in the works just kind of like, it was kind of the same story again, as far as like business wise. Like they sort of like, they actually even grabbed the other band that was on Fugitive with us, The Divorce, who were friends of ours. And so it was like the same roster and kind of the same situation of like, they're like, oh wait, we actually have to like be a label now, you know? And, and Damian had distribution through Secretly Canadian because he was working with that label at that time. So that record probably got out wider than Suburbiac. I mean, Suburbiac did okay, but then we did a full U.S. tour on it. But then it was sort of like just one of those things where they were kind of already winding down their wheels, and I'm like, have this record that I've been like trying to like get out after New Old Friends forever. And so much of that kind of led to me just going like, this is like way too much work trying to like keep all these like plates spinning at the same time. And that probably ended up leading to me doing the Traveling Mercies project next, which was just like live in the studio, like,
let it rip.
Like not like 4 years of working on overdub records and dealing with labels. It was just like burning CDs, like, you know, playing just like sweaty rock and roll shows and kind of setting all that stuff aside. So yeah, I don't know how much.
You're good. Let me ask you about the New Old Friends record briefly. Just your thoughts on it. I mean, it sounds like it, you know, seemed like you said, it got, you know, pretty good distro, and you did some tours on it. Looking back on that record, how do you feel about it overall?
You know, it's probably like my favorite of that early Dolour period. Like, just because, I mean, it's probably the lowest fidelity of all those records, just because it was like, you know, like early Pro Tools on my laptop. But
trying to figure it out, yeah.
Yeah, there was just a real spirit of like, you know, exploration on that record, and I was sort of responding to what had happened through the Suburbiac thing. So like, you know, the album opens with a song called "I Smell a Lawsuit," and a lot of the songs have these sort of like not so subtle references to kind of like, you know, my journey through the crumbling music industry at the time. And when I went to do the Origin Story album, which like kind of reimagined old songs, I found myself going more and more towards the New Old Friend songs, probably because they almost had an unfinished quality to them anyways.
Yeah.
But also just maybe that record just kind of like happened at a time where my skill set was kind of at a spot that I can still relate to more than some of the earlier ones. But
yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, I got you. Did that ever get pressed on vinyl or anything like that, or was that just
No, there was no vinyl on the early Dolour albums. I mean, we did a 7. The first thing we ever did was a 7-inch in 1997, but and then we did a 7-inch in 2001. But yeah, we never did a full length on vinyl.
That'd be kind of cool.
It would be super cool. Yeah. Suburbiac and New Old Friends would be good candidates for vinyl, I think. But
I agree with that. What's with the Made in Mexico? Did they wind up just letting you go as well? Is that kind of how it was, or was it just kind of a handshake deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was sort of. I think the label kind of stopped around the same time. Things were just like kind of not really doing anything. So I don't remember a big like ending to that. I feel like it's sort of just like we did a full U.S. tour, and then I don't think anything happened with that label after that. And I mean, it's not for me to say, but I heard one of the business partners was like siphoning money out of the bank account. Some stuff that I just found out about like a couple years ago that was apparently going on behind the scenes. So, you know.
That's a bummer.
Yeah.
That is a bummer. Well, you mentioned Shane Tutmarc and the Traveling Mercies. Let's talk about that briefly, kind of just, you know, obviously it's right after the record we just talked about, and just kind of maybe talk me through that. You said it was more of a sweaty rock and roll vibe. Yeah, maybe just talk me through that.
Yeah, so there was the record that I had started before the next release, and that finally did come out after the first Traveling Mercies album. So there was kind of a little bit of an overlap.
What was that one called?
It's called The Years in the Wilderness.
Okay, I did see that one. Okay.
Yeah, and that was sort of like a double album that ended up coming out on a Japanese label. And
what label was that on?
It was called like Quince Records, if I'm even pronouncing that right. It was a Japanese label that kind of specialized in power pop, and they had done like a sort of Dolour best of collection a couple years before for like the Japanese market.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I'd had a little relationship with them, and I just actually got that record, The Years in the Wilderness, back late last year.
Rad.
Yeah, come to find out, like the owner of that label, this is not funny at all, but it was just such a bizarre scenario. But like, turns out he died in like a tsunami, and I had never been told. Like, I was never getting messages back from him. It was just a crazy. I had to kind of like find all this out in a really weird way, and it took a long time to kind of get things pulled down because we, you know, with streaming, it's just like once the wheels are in motion, unless somebody says stop, you know.
Yeah.
Stop distributing it. It's just going to keep going. So their distributor was still just like, you know, collecting everything. I never was seeing anything from it. And
oh God.
Yeah. So I finally got to the bottom of that one. So yeah, after all that, it was just like kind of getting to the point where it just felt like such an uphill battle, you know. And
that's what it sounds like. I don't mean that wrong. It just seems like every time it's like you take 2 steps forward, couple steps back, and it's not because of you. It's just. You know. Yeah,
and I was like writing so much, as I kind of still do, but like, you know, I just hadn't quite figured out a way to sort of do it myself, or didn't really have a template of like how to do that, you know. And around this time, like in late 2006, my grandpa passed away, and he was a musician and somebody that I really connected to in our family. And so when he passed away, it just kind of felt like all these trivial, you know, indie label power pop stuff. It just wasn't like, I felt like I was like kind of wanting something with a little more blood and guts and more meaningful to me at the time. And so I put together a little group with my cousin on bass, my brother on drums, and we were sort of doing everything from, like gospel and country and rock and roll and rockabilly and just kind of like mining the depths of American music and kind of like trying to find music to kind of work through, kind of like adult grief for the first time, or like mortality, questions and all that kind of stuff. And so we pumped out 2 records that were mostly originals, but a couple covers and like old songs and stuff. And we pumped out 2 records in like a year. Wow. and then they're like, this isn't really our dream, my brother and my cousin. And so from there, I started just putting out records under my own name and sort of putting together studio bands for the recordings.
Yeah. Were those on any labels at all, or was it just self done?
It was kind of like the early stages of like digital distributors or distributors. And so I worked with some companies on those records, but it was like pretty much like self-released, with just a little help with distro and stuff. But I was able to work with some really cool musicians, and it's funny because like the records under my name are the ones that are probably the most collaborative albums I've made. Wow. Whereas the Dolour ones are pretty much solo records, but like the ones that people would think are solo records of mine are the ones where, I would have a full room of musicians and we're cutting things mostly live and, really relying on people's talents to, bring stuff to the table. And
let me ask you this, having put records out yourself, I know that's, a task and a half. I'm just curious, like what I know it sounds like obviously your past has pushed you to that route, which makes complete sense. But do you find yourself overwhelmed at all with it? And also too,
every day.
Every minute. I mean, like where do you start? I mean, I don't.
Well, here's the thing. So I'd kind of learned that lesson then, but I've had to learn that lesson again and again and again, because even in we're jumping around in timelines here, but like even since moving to Nashville, I've done a handful of things with little labels with good intentions and all that stuff. And it just never ends up, being any better than putting it out yourself. And it's so hard to even just get the small amount of money that they're apparently collecting for you, that it just ends up being so frustrating for no reason, especially these days when you can just, work with CD Baby or, DistroKid, any of those companies and get it out there just as well as they can, Totally. So, and I just feel like with social media and, with people like yourself, being able to, you have to hustle, and that to me, the grind of like self-promotion, is kind of the hardest thing, or having to be like your own advocate,
Oh, I'm sure that's a lot.
You can't just be aloof and go, oh, it just happened that way. It takes so much time and effort and discipline, to do what I do. There's no just like happy accident. Oh, here's a new record that I just happened to,
No, I get it. I get it. I mean, I know doing this podcast at times, I know this is so small in the grand scheme of things, but there's some times where I'm just like, this is the last thing I want to do right now. So I totally get it. And of course, on the other side of things, I'm a natural promoter, I guess, at heart. So I do enjoy telling people about things. So it sounds like you have a good, mindset of it as well. You're excited about it, and it's something that,
I think the thing that I struggle with and that I have been trying to get better at is like, I think it's not in my nature to like talk myself up much. I mean, I do like the excitement of a new record and sharing content and stuff, but I think the tough thing that maybe people in the audience don't understand is like, when they're reading some cool story about the making of a record, that story was like crafted by a PR person, that knows how to like tell a story to pull you in. Yeah. Whereas like when you're left to your own devices, it's like, I'm a songwriter, so I wrote new songs and here they are, but you have to kind of find a way to sort of tell that story
in a beautiful way. Yeah.
Or figure out what that story is. And so it takes so much self-reflection and sometimes you want the music just to speak for itself, but then you find yourself having to be the person that's sort of like selling that story of the song and or the album. And I know that's so valuable because all the things that I love about the records I love are the stories that I'm told about those records. Like that's like 90% of what pulls you in and kind of keeps you interested is sort of the backstories and all that kind of stuff. And to me, that sometimes like that's the hardest thing because it's just what I do, and So
I get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest with you. Just outside looking in, I feel like I see you promoting it really well. I mean, I see it quite often, and I think that's a testament to you doing a good job. And I mean that it's not beating you over the head with it. It's just very much a subtle. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Oh, that's and I always want to take a look at it. It's really cool.
Oh, cool.
That I feel like for me at least, seeing it, it's cool. I think you're doing a great job, honestly.
Yeah, I try to be honest, and I try to think of myself as a fan and like what kind of content I'd want to see, or
totally, absolutely.
Or if something would turn me off if I saw somebody do it, I try not to do that, and because there's a lot of gross stuff out there that I wouldn't really want to be a part of. But
there's some of it that I just, oh my God, I'm like, I can't do it. But I mean, hey, whatever floats one's boat,
Exactly.
Let me ask you. Well, let's talk about not ask you per se, but let's go to the Solar Twin project.
Yeah.
That's kind of how, to be honest with you, I discovered you, and it's not.
Yeah.
I feel bad saying that because I knew what Fugitive Recordings was, and I knew all that whole world, but I just never knew about, you as a band, or Dolour as a band, I should say. And so Solar Twin, talk me through that. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of pressing that on vinyl, which was really cool, and something I still have a copy of it, and it was a cool looking record. So talk me through Solar Twin.
Yeah, so basically I had moved to Nashville just after putting out my first solo album, and kind of had great energy right off the bat in Nashville. The first couple years, like, had a little EP I put out, and like connected with some managers, and was label shopping and all that stuff, working on my second solo album. And it was kind of, again, the same story of these managers sort of just like, once they kind of realized it wasn't going to be this like immediate cash grab of like selling the record to a label, they sort of just ghosted the project.
Wow.
And I was sort of left hanging for about like 5 years. Like I ended up doing a little like single a month series in 2015 with this little label out of Portland, which also was like a total headache. And even though it was just like a buddies thing, it was just, kind of a bust. And so Solar Twin was really the first time I sort of see it as the start of the journey I'm on right now, which was like, I'm building a home studio. I'm locking the door. I'm not letting anybody in on this. I'm just going to do this thing. But I ended up reaching out to a friend of mine. We weren't super tight, but we had a million mutual friends, and we'd hung out a couple times in group settings. But Matthew Hoops from Relient.
Okay, that's awesome.
I just reached out to him to sort of be like, do you have any ideas? He seemed like a pretty smart music business person, and he always has little side hustles and different things going on. And he had over the years kind of like let me know that he was a fan, and he had, known Dolour stuff, and he had been supportive. He'd connected me with some different people I'd written songs with over the years. Yeah. So reached out to him, and then right off the bat, he's like, I want to be involved. Like, let me in on this. And so even though I was like, going into it thinking this is just going to be a solo thing, I was like, okay, cool. Like, and he had a home studio that was 100 times better than mine. And so, so we cut like half of that record at his place, and he did a lot of guitars on maybe half the songs. And sadly, I mean, we had a great, when we were working together, it was amazing. But like, he had his day job with Relient K, who were just about to put out a record. I forget if it was a self-titled one, but it's got like the 3 dots on the cover. It would have been like 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
And then he was just like on the road, like for infinity. Yeah. And so again, sort of left hanging with this record that was sort of half done. So then I ended up finishing it myself and calling in a couple friends for some things, but put it out myself. But then somehow I think either through Matt Hoops or through my buddy Ethan Luck, got connected with the SML, XL.
Yeah, I was wondering how that.
Finally.
I kind of figured that Hoops had something to do with it because I know they've done some of the Relient K records. And
Yeah,
stuff.
I think it might have bbeen Ethan Luck, but I mean, Ethan had been in Relient K, and so it was all.
Yeah.
I think he had done some solo records with that label.
That's right. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I remember getting your message of like, check out your vinyl. Like you were like, in the plant, like, and, being able to see the, pink and black splatter.
I forgot I did that. That is so funny. I hate to say that, but I literally forgot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Hi, my name is Ryan Parrish. I play in Parallel, Hopes Fall, and Celebrity. And you're listening to the Rumors Are True podcast.
Hey everyone, this is Jeremy from the Rumors Are True podcast. Hey, if you're a fan of emo, hardcore, indie rock, or punk, you need to check out my friends at Steadfast Records. Steadfast is an online treasure trove of vinyl gems. They've got everything from the classics to the latest releases, all meticulously curated. So if you're looking to expand your collection or discover your new favorite band, head over to steadfastrecords.net and use the code RUMORS to save 10% on your next order. Trust me, your turntable is gonna thank you. That's steadfastrecords.net. Pre-order items excluded from discount.
Yeah.
Bizarre. I literally. So I went off of social media for a couple years. So I have that. It seems like ages ago.
It would have been 2017.
Yeah. No, that makes. I totally remember it now. That you say that, I'm like, and I would do that quite often with artists that we were doing that with.
I never had anybody from the plant show me what's going on, and it was super cool to see that. And
that's so cool. I hate that I learned this way, but that totally makes sense, and it's something I totally would do. But yeah, no, that was cool. Like, it was weird because, the concept of working at a record factory seems like a incredible, amazing, especially with your friends. It's like, oh, this is gonna rule. But man, 10 minutes in, I'm like, this sucks. Like, you're just pressing the records, and it's fun for Were
you have to quality control, listen to them and stuff, or is that somebody else's?
Well, so
job?
Basically what they did is they would press every 100 or so. We would take one, pop it on, kind of let it play through the Sonos or whatever. But I mean, and there'd be times too where when we come off that looks a little odd. Let's listen to it, that type of thing. But it was a 3 or 4 man show at one point. I helped them kind of get that on the road, or help them clear out the warehouse and all that. And I worked there for, I don't know, probably a year and 3 months, something like that. And I love those guys. They're great friends of mine, but I just could not live off of it. And I went with the intention of, hopefully it would blow up. And actually, ironically, they just actually closed down recently. 3 months ago, 4 months ago.
It's sad, because I had reached out to them in the early stages of doing this, return to Dolour stuff, and it kind of seemed like, wheels were moving a lot slower there, and he was so up for anything, like when I was doing the Solar Twin thing, and then it was like a very different vibe, coming back around. Yeah,
and I mean, they've got lives and families, and Jonathan plays with Johnny Swim. I don't know if you know them or not. He's like their musical director, plays guitar for them, and
plays with who?
Johnny Swim.
Johnny Swim. Okay.
Yeah, you should check them out. Okay. They're actually really big. Kind of a guy-girl duo. Her mom was disco queen. I cannot remember her name. Anyway.
Donna Summers?
Yes, Donna Summer.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Whoa.
I'm pretty sure it's her. Don't quote me on it, but it's one of those. I think it's Donna Summer.
Okay.
Her daughter and Abner, who's from Jacksonville, who grew up with Walt, who was one of the VRP guys, and then Jonathan and Walt were in Sun Bears together. So it's this whole incestual world, if you will. But yeah, anyway, so Jonathan's been busy with that, and he lives in LA now, and then Walt's got a family, and he was working at a church on the side doing VRP, and it just it's unfortunate because I love seeing the process of the whole thing, this, being able to do something unique and be creative, and they're total nerds about it, and they delve themselves into it. I was just kind of like, hey, what can I do? And I was hoping to be a salesperson at some point, but it obviously didn't work out, and it was fine. And I love those guys dearly, but it's just, I'm bummed that they had to close it down. It was really cool to have it in your own backyard,
Yeah. Well, that's our origin story right there.
Yeah, I know. That's so cool. I do remember that now. Now that you say that, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally would have done that for sure. Sweet, man. Well, let's talk about. Let me actually. I know you mentioned it, kind of just getting on vinyl and stuff. How was that finally to have one in your hand? Like you said, you had a 7-inch, but that was like an actual.
Oh, you mean the original 7-inch we did?
Yeah, but I mean like the Solar Twin, just having a 12-inch.
Oh,
what was that like for you?
No, it was super cool. And, especially being, a record that I produced myself, and it kind of represented a whole new era for me, and so, it was very exciting. And, I'd never seen, a pink and black splatter vinyl before. And, everyone that sees that record is like, oh my gosh, it's such a unique look.
Yeah, it's really cool looking.
It was super cool to hold that in my hand, and I love how it turned out.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Sweet. Well, let's talk about the new era of Dolour.
Yeah.
I know you got a new record coming out, and maybe kind of talk me through that, and all the details on that, and just kind of your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess we can kind of just jump from Solar Twin. I ended up producing quite a few different things.
Let's talk about that then. Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, I worked with this band called the Explorers Club.
I know Jason.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I worked with them on their self-titled album, and they also did a covers album at the same time. And so I tracked a lot of harmonies and guitar and bass, and even co-wrote a few songs on the originals album. And also around that same time did a record with Sean Nelson from that old Seattle band Harvey Danger.
Oh, love Harvey Danger.
He'd moved to Nashville, and we had vaguely known each other. He worked at KXP, the radio station, and he had done Dolour's first interview on the radio way back in the day. And so he took me out to coffee one day and was just like, hey, I want to do a record. Would you want to do it? And I was like, cool, let's go. And so working with him, and he kind of had this project that had been sort of abandoned 10 years earlier with all these songs. And then we ended up co-writing some stuff together. But it kind of planted the seed of going back to old music and making it new and whatever. And I started thinking about all the Dolour songs I'd sort of abandoned when I sort of quickly shifted into the Traveling Mercies period. I had been kind of in the middle of working on a record that I just was I just was ready for a strong, shut that door, open another one kind of thing. And but there was all these songs that kind of were still floating around in my head all these years of what's ever going to happen with those songs, and I had kind of flirted with the idea of doing a rarities thing of just sort of the demos of that. But I'm no, these songs kind of deserve a proper treatment. Yeah. And there was still stuff to finish on the songs. And so, so initially the idea was well, let me just go back to that period of writing that, I never had put those songs out or never finished those songs. And so that was the Royal We. All those songs had been kind of started sometime around 2006 or before.
Sure.
But finally kind of given finishing them up, and sort of treated it like I was producing another artist's songs, and sort of just
oh, cool.
Yeah. That was kind of the only way I could really do it without it feeling like I was doing some sort of weird nostalgic trip thing. It was just sort of imagining 24-year-old Shane coming to me and going hey, I have these songs. What do you see?
What do you do with it?
Yeah. And so I kind of treated it like I was working with Sean Nelson or working with Explorers Club, and just sort of being very hard on the songs, and changing anything I wanted to change, and not being too precious about these little song ideas that
Sure.
So I guess the thing that kind of was surprising to me was by the time I kind of put up a pre-order for it, there was so much more excitement around it than I anticipated.
That's awesome.
Old Dolour fans. And I think one of the things that was a bummer was that I didn't really, I found an audience with my solo stuff, but I didn't take the Dolour audience with me kind of at all on that journey. It was once I was kind of doing rootsy stuff, they were we're out. And in hindsight, I wish I would have kind of bridged that gap. And I really think that Dolour record that would have come out in between, that came out later, kind of would have been that bridge.
Sure.
But to go from New Old Friends to all of a sudden this like Americana rootsy trip, was just like too much for most people. And so I was just kind of surprised coming back to Dolour. There was like people excited about it. And so, so we were in the middle of the pandemic at that point. This is like June 2020. And, it's like full lockdown mode. And like, and my wife and I just moved into a new house that summer. And, so I was just like, I guess I'm just going to keep going, And so I started writing kind of like the first new Dolour songs in like 15 years. And that became the Televangelist album, which came out in spring of 2021. And then it kind of just naturally led to like, okay, well, if this Dolour thing is like back now, I guess there's going to have to be some shows at some point. I'm going to have to like deal with the old material. And do I even connect with these songs anymore? Like, is this...
Sure.
What's that going to feel like to play songs that I wrote in my late teens, early 20s? And so I was like, I need to like renew my vows with these songs. And so I kind of went back to sort of highlights of the first 4 records. And again, kind of like the Royal We, I sort of just was like, if I wanted to change a lyric, I changed a lyric. If I wanted to change a chord progression, whatever, I sort of just like tore the songs apart and rebuilt them.
Wow.
So the Origin Story album is all songs that were from the original 4 albums, but they're completely sort
That's
of
cool.
Yeah. So it was like also just like equally like cathartic and sort of like working through all the trauma of like, because some of those, pretty much all those early Dolour records, I just have so much like sense memory trauma of like the label situations and
totally,
live band members and bad managers and whatever, So it was nice to sort of have a clean slate with that material. And so after like, 3 albums in a year and a half, I was like, okay, nobody needs more Dolour music right now, like let's take a breather. And, but I was so kind of like charged up from just like that grind of, that I just kind of kept writing. And so, so what ended up happening was I would sort of just like drop a single kind of whenever I was like at a place where I was into it. And so, which ended up being, I've kind of learned my lesson that's sort of tough because you have to end up doing almost as much promotion as you would for an album.
Sure.
When you're dropping a single and you're doing a video and you're, whatever. And then dealing with the postpartum depression of the release and then like sort of the, inevitable letdown that it's not like a number 1 hit. And then like, so it kind of ended up being a pretty like hard way. I probably won't do that again. And, I wouldn't want to do a series of singles when I haven't finished a record yet. Like that just kind of like, I think delayed the process so much longer. So now here we are almost 2 years since the first single came out of this project.
Holy crap.
But I during the mixing stage, I ended up kind of taking all of these songs, including all the ones that were released as singles, kind of in different directions and reworking them and redoing vocals and redoing guitars. And so this record is kind of like a fresh, representation of the journey of the last 2 years of working on the record.
That's cool. I love it.
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, and the fact that, you've kind of always been in the sphere, if you will, in the 2 years. So it's not like you just dropped a single, disappeared, you're right. Always kind of just churning butter, if you will. Tell me about the new record and just kind of your thoughts on it. I know you talked about it being kind of a culmination of the last 2 years, but what are we looking forward to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me, I really see a strong, I guess being that it's been such a productive last couple of years with these records and the return to Dolour, I feel like I personally can just see such a development in just, the technical side of it as well as, the end result. I feel like if you've liked the Royal We and Televangelist and Origin Story, I would think you'd like this new one. And I sort of see it as maybe like a end of an era of this period, I don't know exactly what's next, but I sort of see it as a sort of like almost like a wrap up sort of situation of this little journey I've been on. And I don't know. I'm kind of still, the record comes out in real time as we're talking. It comes out in a few days.
Oh, nice.
So I'm still kind of in that like period of like learning things about it, and sort of like noticing things about it that often it will be months or years after finishing a record where you're like, oh, that's what that was kind of about. Or So I feel like it's still pretty fresh to me, but I'm starting to kind of see some cool connections between the songs and sort of like almost like the way the songs communicate with each other and stuff like that. So
that's awesome. And you got like a vinyl coming out and all the CD and all that.
Yeah. So there's and it's all available for pre-order right now. Unless this is after Friday, May 24th, and then it's available. But yeah, it's all on my Bandcamp page. Vinyl CD or like t-shirt combo versions, and I kind of put together whatever possible combo you could want, like including the new album with Televangelist or the new album with the Royal We, cool. Or every kind of combination you could do. But
was that a lot?
It was a lot of work, just getting like the photos Sounds together like for everything and just laying everything out, and it's been a ton of work and trying to do videos for almost every song.
Dude.
So it's been a grind. So I'm not really done yet,
Totally,
and probably won't be for another few weeks or who knows. But yeah, I say this after every record, but I really feel more than ever that I'm really ready for a little breather and gonna try not to touch the piano or the guitar anytime soon. And
dude, totally, totally understand that. And you don't want to wear yourself out. You gotta, you gotta take care of your health and your mind and your wife and all that stuff. So
absolutely,
music can always be written, at some point down the road.
Yeah.
So, I definitely, I'm sure it's hard to not want to write a great song. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure it's hard to not want to put pen to paper. But you got to have those times.
Yeah. I know that this mixing process, because I also got like a whole new computer rig and interface and everything through the process of mixing. So there was all this learning curve of adapting everything and transferring everything, and so it was kind of extended a little longer than usual, to finish it up. And so that's why we ended up taking that vacation last week. My wife was like, okay, we need to get you out of this house, and
totally, dude. I get that. What any shows coming up that you got going planned?
There's something later this year actually with Explorers Club. I've been touring with them the last couple months, just the little one-offs here and there. But I pretty much, since we first connected in late 2019, I've played on most of their releases, and he's been trying to get me on the road with him since then, and it's finally kind of worked out. So we're gonna play at least one show, if not multiple shows together this fall. But it's not a very active live project for me. Yeah. It's I'm way more about the writing and the recording and stuff like that. But
I get that.
But yeah, I've done a couple shows in Seattle since returning to Dolour and since the pandemic's opened up and everything. But we'll see. I don't know if a tour kind of situation's in the cards at this point. But
no, I get that.
We'll see.
Let me ask you, what song and what record are you most proud of?
What song on what record am I most proud of? Oh man, it's such a cliche, but I mean they're like your children.
I know everyone says it. I know it's a hard thing to say.
I could name a couple on the new record that this song called "Judging by the Moon and the Stars" is a personal favorite. It's kind of it's just kind of like a dreamy sort of world, and it kind of stands out on the record because there's kind of nothing else like it on the album. But it's the second to last song on the album and sort of just puts you in a real dreamy space. As far as the writing and stuff, I'm pretty proud of this song called "Have I Finally Gone Insane," which is actually a love song, but you kind of wouldn't know that sort of from the title. Or I did this interview the other day and this guy was like, what makes you think you're insane? I'm like, wait, that's not the point. But it's sort of like the idea of being surprised by falling in love, or sort of being it's not, if you're sort of like this jaded person who's sort of given up on love, and then you find the situation, it's sort of like you're like, I must be going crazy, what's happening to me.
Sure.
So that's sort of the premise of it. And that's what I'm really proud of. I mean, really every song on the record, the kind of prerequisite to it making it to the record, since it's just a 10-song album, I really chiseled down a lot of material to sort of get to these 10. And so at one point or another, they were all my favorite song, that's sort of.
I get it.
It's on there. Yeah.
Got 10 babies. I get it.
Yeah. do you have a favorite? Has any jumped out to you?
Sun on My Brain I liked a lot.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I thought, and I it's kind of one of those that like I started delving into you more since we were going to talk, and I was like, oh, Solar Twin, and I just kind of put it all together. And so it's like, now I'm discovering you in the later part. So that's what I've heard. But now, I have a lot to go back on. So I'm really stoked.
Yeah. Yeah. But, well, cool, man. Yeah. Sun on My Brain, that was like, we had like a Y membership last summer, and we were like using their pool a lot. Yeah. And they were always blasting, like pool tunes or whatever. And I was like, man, like I've never written a song that would make sense on this pool tunes playlist, I need a jam that would like work in this kind of setting.
That makes sense. I get that.
And then, you see like with Spotify these days, it's like Here Comes the Sun is the Beatles' most streamed song, or like Island in the Sun by Weezer is their most. Yeah. And it's because everyone just throws it on their summer playlist or whatever. And I'm like, I need one of those songs, And
I love that. That's a cool concept thoughtful way to do that. I get that. That's cool.
Yeah, and just trying to kind of find a way into how do you write that kind of thing. And I mean, it ended up just being conversations that my wife and I have all the time of like, we're just working every day. Like, how are we going to get out of here? Like, how we need to break.
That, dude. That's cool. That's rad. Yeah. So I know you don't have the Magic 8 Ball, but what does the future look like for you?
Man, this is probably the toughest time ever to ask me that question, because I feel like whenever I'm finishing a record, I'm like, is this my last album of all time? Like, am I like, am I done? Like, I always, it's always a little bit of like a relief mixed with postpartum depression of like finishing a project. And, because I've like lived with this record for like 2 years now, or the evolution of the record. So, I mean, I'm a clean slate right now, like I have to assume based on my history that there's going to be more music coming at some point, because I've tried quitting and it's it's a
hard habit to break.
It's a hard habit to break. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I would just say, keep checking the social media and our Bandcamp page, and I'm sure we'll keep it interesting.
Awesome, man. I love that. Well, this has been such a cool conversation, man. I really appreciate your time, Shane, and I'm really stoked what you have going on, and just, like I said, to be able to delve into the past a little and just be able to get into that. I'm really looking forward to that, and just really appreciate your time and just your conversation.
Dude, thank you. I love this sort of free-flowing, rambling nature of this. I feel like we were able to actually talk about a lot of stuff that you don't normally get to talk about.
Yeah, so. Man. I really appreciate, you opening my eyes to this, the past. It's just really intriguing to me. So.
Well, right on, Jeremy.
Awesome, man. All right, well, I will talk to you soon. Hopefully we get to hang in the future in person. That'd be kind of cool.
Absolutely.
Awesome, man. Well, we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
Hey, thank you to the listener for tuning in again and again. I really appreciate it. So cool. The likes, the subscribes. If you'd like to add me on Instagram and Facebook at The Rumors Are True Cast, thank you again for all the support. So cool. Thank you to Shane Tutmarc. Awesome conversation. So cool to hear your perspective, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you again for your time, Shane. Got some incredible artists on the horizon per usual. And you know it, guys. Nostalgia is still a hell of a drug.
Oh, hallelujah. Get up right now. Man. I'm hearing something real powerful for someone. And now listen to this.